Have you ever noticed that the happiest people after retirement are rarely the richest? For years, I believed happiness came from a bigger house, a larger bank account, and a lifetime of success. But after meeting one ordinary retired man, I discovered a truth that changed my life forever. The people who enjoy retirement the most aren't the ones who own the most. They're the ones who have learned to let go of what they no longer need. Stay with me until the end, because one simple lesson from that man may completely change the way you think about retirement, happiness, and what it truly means to live a rich life. When I was in my 30s, life felt like a race. Every year I wanted a better salary. Every promotion felt like another step toward success. Whenever someone bought a bigger house or a newer car, I quietly compared myself with them. I never admitted it, but I wanted people to see that I was doing well. Like many others, I believed success had to be visible. The nicer your home looked, the more successful you appeared. The more expensive your car, the more respect you earned. At least that's what I believed. For nearly 40 years, I worked longer hours than I needed to. I skipped family dinners. I postponed holidays. I promised myself that one day I would slow down and enjoy life. That day always seemed to be just around the corner, but it never arrived. Then retirement finally came. I expected to wake up feeling completely free. Instead, I felt strangely empty. For the first time in decades, nobody expected me to rush anywhere. There were no meetings, no deadlines, no emails waiting for me. I had all the time I had dreamed about, yet I didn't know what to do with it. One morning, while walking through a quiet neighborhood, I noticed an elderly man watering flowers outside a small white house. His clothes were simple. His car was old. His garden wasn't perfect. But there was something about him that immediately caught my attention. He was smiling, not the polite smile people wear in public. A peaceful smile, the kind that comes from someone who has nothing left to prove. As I walked past, he looked up and said, "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" We spoke for only a few minutes, but I left feeling calmer than I had in months. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he had done for a living. But somehow he seemed richer than many people I had known with far more money. A week later, I saw him again. This time he invited me to sit with him on his front porch and share a cup of tea. That simple invitation became the beginning of a friendship that would completely change the way I understood retirement, success, and the meaning of a truly happy life. The following Tuesday, I returned to the little white house. George was already sitting on his porch with 2 cups of tea, as though he had been expecting me. "Come," he said with a warm smile. "The tea tastes better when it's shared." I smiled and took a seat beside him. For a few minutes we simply watched the birds fly across the morning sky. There was no rush, no phones ringing, no deadlines waiting, only silence, and strangely it felt comforting. Finally I asked him the question that had been on my mind since we first met. "George, were you always this happy?" He chuckled softly. "Oh, not even close." He leaned back in his chair and looked toward the garden. "When I was younger, I believed happiness was waiting somewhere in the future. I thought if I earned more money, bought a larger house, and impressed enough people, I'd finally feel satisfied." He paused for a moment. But every goal I reached was quickly replaced by another. A better job, a newer car, a bigger television, a nicer neighborhood. The finish line kept moving. His words sounded painfully familiar. That had been my life too. George looked at me and smiled. Do you know the biggest mistake most people make before retirement? I shook my head. They spend 40 years preparing financially for retirement, but almost no time preparing emotionally. I had never thought about retirement that way. He continued, one day your job disappears, your title disappears, the busy schedule disappears, and if your identity depended on those things, you begin to wonder who you really are. Those words settled heavily in my heart. For years I had introduced myself by my profession. My work had become my identity. Without it, who was I? George seemed to read my thoughts. Retirement doesn't take away your purpose, he said gently. It simply gives you the chance to discover a better one. As the morning sun climbed higher, he pointed toward a small wooden birdhouse hanging from a tree. I built that after I retired, he said proudly. I planted these flowers. I learned to bake bread. I started reading books I never had time to open. None of those things made me richer, but every one of them made me happier. I looked around his small garden. Nothing there was expensive, yet everything felt alive. For the first time, I began to understand that happiness after retirement isn't created by having more. It's created by appreciating more. As I walked home that morning, one question stayed in my mind. If a simple life could bring this much peace, why do so many people spend their entire lives chasing something else? I didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question would completely change the way I viewed success for the rest of my life. For the next several weeks, I visited George almost every Friday morning. Those visits slowly became the highlight of my week. We rarely discussed money, politics, or the news. Instead, we talked about life, family, memories, and the lessons that only time can teach. Every conversation left me feeling lighter than before. One morning, I arrived to find George trimming the roses in his garden. He smiled and handed me a pair of gardening gloves. "Come," he said, "let's work while we talk." As we carefully trimmed the plants, I asked him, "Do you ever regret not working longer or earning more money?" He paused for a moment before answering. "Of course I wanted more when I was younger," he said. But I eventually realized that every extra hour I spent chasing money was an hour I couldn't spend living. His words stayed with me. He continued cutting a branch before pointing toward a wooden bench beneath a large tree. "I built that bench 20 years ago," he said proudly. "I've watched every season from that spot. I've seen my grandchildren learn to walk, celebrated birthdays, comforted friends, and enjoyed countless sunsets. None of those memories could have been purchased." I looked at the old bench. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't perfect. Yet somehow it seemed more valuable than many luxury items I had admired throughout my life. George sat down and invited me to join him. "People think retirement is about escaping work," he said quietly. "But real retirement is about reclaiming your time." He looked across the garden with peaceful eyes. "When we're young, we spend time to earn money. When we're older, we often spend money trying to buy back time. The sad part is that time is the one thing money can never replace." I felt those words deep within my heart. For years I had measured success by promotions, possessions, and achievements. George measured success by peaceful mornings, meaningful conversations, and time shared with the people he loved. As I walked home that afternoon, I realized something I had never fully understood before. The happiest retirees are not the ones with the biggest savings accounts. They are the ones who protect their time, appreciate ordinary moments, and understand that a simple life leaves more room for the things that matter most. At that moment I knew George still had one final lesson to teach me, and it would become the greatest lesson of all. A few weeks after our conversation in the garden, George invited me to join him for a walk along the river. The morning air was cool, and the water reflected the golden light of the rising sun. We walked slowly, greeting strangers with quiet smiles. No one seemed to know George's career or how much money he had earned. Yet everyone who met him seemed happy to see him. As we reached an old wooden bridge, George stopped and rested his hands on the railing. "Do you know what surprises me most about retirement?" he asked. I shook my head. People spend their entire working lives dreaming about freedom, but when freedom finally arrives, many don't know how to enjoy it. He looked at the flowing river. They're so used to being busy that silence makes them uncomfortable. They're so used to chasing tomorrow that they forget how to appreciate today. His words reminded me of my own first months after retirement. I had filled every empty hour with unnecessary tasks because I didn't know how to simply be still. George smiled as if he had read my thoughts. "Being busy isn't the same as being fulfilled," he said. "The happiest retirees aren't those with the fullest calendars. They're the ones with the fullest hearts." We sat on a nearby bench and watched a family feeding ducks along the riverbank. Children laughed. Parents smiled. An elderly couple quietly held hands without saying a word. George pointed toward them. "Look carefully," he whispered. None of those moments required wealth. They only required presence. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The peaceful silence said more than words ever could. As we walked home, I realized I had spent years searching for happiness in places it had never lived. I had searched in promotions, in possessions, in recognition, yet true happiness had been quietly waiting in ordinary mornings, honest friendships, meaningful conversations, and the freedom to enjoy each day without trying to impress anyone. That afternoon I wrote a single sentence in my journal. The richest retirement is not measured by what you own, but by how peacefully you live. I didn't realize it then, but one final conversation with George would leave me with a lesson I would carry for the rest of my life, and it was the lesson I now hope to share with you.